the only reason I recorded the story and the only reason I'm telling it now is because I think more and more people are going to be going through and are already going through an extreme transformation in consciousness, much more novelty than we've ever experienced before. And that can create that experiencing that rapid amount of novelty and change can be really unsettling. And I think it's really important that people have some sort of anchor, some sort of context to say, well, she seems relatively normal. She seems to have come through it relatively unscathed. So,
Okay. Yes.
yeah. And also there is teachings that came through with it, which I think are,
Yeah.
are very, very important about how we transform our state of being at this time to come back into harmony, back into alignment, in order that we can transform much more rapidly. Mm.
So, Freya, we're on to our second conversation of, I'm sure, many. But before we kick off, I was thinking it might be quite a good idea to just give an oversight as to why we're actually even making these recordings, why anyone might be interested in coming along the journey with us, and what's the purpose of it, really.
Yeah, well, it's been this is a really long journey. This is going to be a long story to tell because it's, it spans kind of 25 years. But actually, I think it's a much, much, much bigger story than that in terms of the implications that it has for all of us, really. And what's happening at this point in time in consciousness, what's happening to our reality at this time. And there's no doubt that it is transforming very rapidly and quite extremely. And I think when I started this journey, I really had no idea what on earth was happening to me and why my reality was becoming so strange. And of course, everything that happened to me, because I had no context, I had no way to understand what was going on. And so each experience was kind of seen as separate from the others, until it started to build up some momentum and I began to see patterns and make connections. There were times when I just thought I was losing my mind. I thought that, reality was slipping away from me. And it was, because it was changing. But it wasn't changing for anyone else around me. It wasn't changing in the collective experience. It was only changing in my life. And it took a while to really understand what was happening to me. And what we're reviewing now, is part of a journey that really, to me, in many ways is lost now, because it's so far away in my consciousness. I actually have to really go seeking to find these memories. And luckily I did write them all down as I was experiencing them. So I have a record, and I've certainly told, a very small number of people about them that are close to me over the years, and for the last 10 years, you've been one of those people that's shared some of the story, but we've never shared all of the story. But I think, you've probably had an inkling that story is not just about me, it's about something that's happening in the collective.
Absolutely.
And so the only reason I recorded the story and the only reason I'm telling it now is because I think more and more people are going to be going through and are already going through an extreme transformation in consciousness. And I think I've always felt that by sharing my journey, that would give people some normality around it. Not that it is normal, but it is perhaps the new normal. We're moving into a new state of consciousness, a new expanded state of consciousness, which is much deeper, much more multi-layered, multi-dimensional, a lot of people will call it. It's not linear anymore. It's becoming there's a lot of novelty, much more novelty than we've ever experienced before. And that can create that experiencing that rapid amount of novelty and change can be really unsettling. And I think it's really important that people have some sort of anchor, some sort of context to say, well, she seems relatively normal. She seems to have come through it relatively unscathed. So,
Okay. Yes.
yeah. And also there is teachings that came through with it, which I think
Yeah.
are very, very important about how we transform our state of being at this time to come back into harmony, back into alignment, in order that we can transform much more rapidly the collective, because we are kind of moving in two trajectories at the same time now, as we always are. As something is rising, this new earth, this new world, this new potential is rising, something is falling, and the old world is falling. And I think it's really important that we realize that we're in that trajectory together towards that new world, and that can give us a lot of security and confidence that in order for that new to arise, the old does have to fall, that nothing that's going on is wrong. Everything that's going on was intended to happen, had to happen. It's a natural cycle that we're in. It's just a very, very big cycle. So we haven't been prepared for it necessarily, but we can't stop it happening. So,
yeah. Well, it's interesting you say that you came through it, because I think it's still it's an onward and continuous journey, isn't it? So you haven't really come through it, as in at the end of it. It's continuous, as will be revealed obviously as we go on. But let's go back to pick up from where we were after our first conversation. So words like enlightenment and consciousness, they were not part of your vocabulary, were they? You just weren't in that space at that point. You just were just average Joe doing stuff, and these things were happening to you, and you were just starting it. I get the impression to think that you had to start putting pieces together here, that it just wasn't normal, some of the things that had happened.
I think up to the point we got up to in the last conversation, which was when I went to the Brancusi exhibition, and I was physically moved and emotionally moved. It was like an epiphany in the exhibition, and I think so up to that point, everything, although the events that had happened were very strange, I hadn't added them up. I hadn't put them together. So, and they were relatively far apart in time. So it wasn't a cascade of events. It was kind of one or two. And then I'd given up. I knew I had to give up my job to pursue sculpture, because that was the door that had opened for me.
Yeah.
Something had happened to me which made no sense at that exhibition. It was extremely profound. It stayed with me long after the exhibition was over. Being in the exhibition was over, and it moved me to know that I had to give up my job, and that whatever had happened in that room, I had to find out what it was. That was kind of the way I felt about it. I didn't feel like I've got to become a sculptor too. I'm desperate to make sculpture. It wasn't that. It was that the sculpture was the mechanism or the vehicle for the journey at that point. So I got onto that vehicle, and I gave up my job. I started making sculpture, but I also got, as soon as I gave up my job, I got really unwell, really unwell. And
in what way unwell?
I just had an extremely painful condition that couldn't be helped, and the nature of the condition was that I couldn't take painkillers either, because the painkillers made it worse. So every day I was in such intense pain that I would say slightly in altered state of consciousness because of the pain, and that was every single day. And it went on for months. Absolute. I think it was nearly a year in total and I could barely leave the house. My whole life just kind of collapsed into just being in bed, in the bath, or trying to make sculpture in my pajamas, basically, which is I was hanging on to that, and sculptures came out of me. Sculptures came out of me that I now recognize were actually coming from these altered states of consciousness. I wasn't learning to make sculpture; it just happened. It just spontaneously happened, and yeah, I started to have the concept of Christ consciousness. Now, again, as a non-religious person, that seems like a strange term as well. And again, that isn't a term that I picked up from a book or I was reading about or anything like that. It was something that just bubbled up inside me. Christ consciousness. And again, there was very few people to talk about all of this stuff.
What did that mean to you? What did Christ consciousness mean to you?
It felt like the sense that I had was that I was carrying it. And I don't think now, looking back, that I related that to the experience of waking up in love that had happened a few years previously.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I was joining dots of these at all. I just felt like something was in me. And again, not a term that a non-religious person really wants to be carrying around. But it happened. That was what happened. It started to be in my awareness. Again, there's no kind of expanded context that I can give to this, because these are experiences of gnosis. Gnosis doesn't have a journey that you can kind of say, oh, well, I was reading this book and then I learned more about this and I went on a course and that explained this. That's external information. Gnosis comes up from within. You just know it. Something starts to bubble up and you start to feel it. Language comes that you've never used before.
Yeah.
Terms come that you've never heard before, and they stick. They rattle around in your consciousness. And that's what the Christ consciousness term was doing.
And were you more intrigued by this, or were you more, I want this out of my life? Where did you sit?
I didn't have any. It wasn't really. I wasn't intrigued by it, and I was so. My world was so small. I was literally living inside myself, because I had no place in the world. I could barely function in the world. And the pain, I don't, if you've ever been in intense pain for any length of time, the world outside just disappears.
Labor, I would say labor probably is
labor, in labor, in a way, you're kind of so fixated on the baby that there's a process, you're
an end result, yes.
There's an end point. Whereas for me, there was no end in sight. And there was no process. It was just intense pain, and it just there's nowhere to go but in. Literally nowhere to go. And a lot of things started to happen. I started having dreams about what initially, because again, no context, no understanding, no awareness. This is pre-2000 now, late 90s. And I started having dreams of being in some sort of civilization that wasn't my own. I located it geographically as being in Mexico, and I was in some sort of ceremonies and things that were happening in this. I thought the word that came into my mind was actually Aztec, because I knew of the Aztec culture. That's the only one I knew, and I kind of thought about of it as that, and that became a complete fixation for me. I just had a sense that I had to go to Mexico, and I had to see these pyramids that I was dreaming about in these strange dreams. And again, I'd never read a book about Mexico. I'd never seen anything about that culture. I mean, obviously bits had got in that gave me the word Aztec, but there was no general understanding of that. Just a really powerful sense that I had to go there. And I was looking into traveling to Mexico, but we were, we had no idea how it would be possible. Would it be insane to book tickets knowing I couldn't leave the house? I could.
Yeah, and what are you going there for as well?
Exactly.
Why?
Why would you do it? So the only reason for wanting to go was these dreams. That was it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Must have been pretty compelling.
Well, it was. I don't know. I mean, when I think back on it now, it was all there was. There was pain. There was attempting to make sculpture, and there was Mexico.
Right.
Go to Mexico. That was it. Just
Mm.
It was almost as if everything else was taken off the table as a possibility. Just that was left.
Okay.
So around that time, I had a very, very profound dream, the most profound dream I've ever had in my life. And again, now I don't know whether it was a dream or some sort of other level of consciousness opening up. But the dream involved myself and my partner meeting a man and a woman, and they were of non they weren't English, put it that way. I knew they weren't English. And the woman took my partner away, and the man, when I looked at him, I don't know about you, but whenever I have dreams, if I have a dream and there's somebody in that dream, I either can identify them as somebody I already know, or I never see their face. I don't see them. This man was, I can still see him today now. And the thought that went through my mind when I looked at him was, what a very interesting looking man. I wonder if he's from South America or the Far East. I couldn't place his looks.
Okay.
Anyway, this man took me into this space, and this space was just like an infinite space of whiteness, and hanging in a grid from above were these balls, metal balls, about the size of a volleyball, and they were all hanging about head height in a perfect grid from these strands, these strings. And the man disappeared and then appeared somewhere in this grid and pulled one of these balls back and pushed, swung it so it hit the next, hit the next, hit the next. And initially it went in a straight line, and I was just watching these balls clacking into each other. And then suddenly it went off at an angle, and then was going randomly, to me, what appeared to be randomly, knocking into balls until it came round behind me and smacked me in the head and knocked me down. And the pain was just unbelievable. This metal ball cracking into my head. And then I stood up, and he appeared somewhere else, and he did it again. And the same thing of it appearing to go straight and then going off on this unfollowable pattern, smacking me in the head. And now this went on and on and on and on. It was a little bit like, the Groundhog Day.
The Groundhog, yeah.
Where it just repeated and repeated. Each time he'd appear somewhere different, but he did the same thing, and the same thing occurred. I just couldn't follow the pattern. I didn't know when it was going to come and hit me.
No way to escape it.
And eventually, at some point, I stood up and I said, "Stop! You don't have to carry on. I know what you're trying to teach me." And I knew again from within that I was being shown that there was a mathematical pattern inherent in our reality, a mathematical perfection, but that the pattern was so complex, and I was too close to it to see it, to understand it. And because I didn't understand it, that was creating my suffering and my pain. And when I think about that now, what that means to me now, it means everything. Back then, we knew nothing. I knew nothing about sacred geometry. The fact that there is geometry and mathematics inherent in every aspect of our reality. You know, that if you really want to understand the nature of this reality, and you have to look into those things, you know, that there are perfect ratios between, for example, the earth, the sun, and the moon that can cause, you know, make eclipses possible. You know, things like this that we just take for granted. When you actually look into the mathematics, it's impossible mathematics. There is a deep intelligence, a vast intelligence behind this reality that looks random. You know, we live as if life is random. We live as if the world and nature are randomly occurring, but they aren't. Nothing is randomly occurring. And we're now, what, nearly 25 years later, that's becoming more and more and more apparent to us, that nothing is random. Everything is controlled and related to these deep mathematical, geometric ratios and patterns. But because we're in them,
Okay,
we can't see them.
So the dream, you said no, enough. I get it. What happened?
So the dream stopped, and then the next day, I think it was, I, again, for no apparent reason, asked my partner to put a little postcard up in the local shop to sell my TV. Now I know these all sounds really random, but something was guiding me. There was no reason for me to sell my television. I didn't need the money. I didn't need to get rid of the TV. Wasn't in the way, and I really did not need anybody coming to the house. You know, I was on my own. My partner was away working in London. Anyway, the postcard goes up, and that night I get a call from somebody who wants to come and see the TV. And I'm resistant. I'm like, I don't really want anyone to come, but I know I have to. And I say, okay, fine. And there's a knock on the door, and I open the door, and the same thought comes into my mind. What a very interesting looking man. I wonder if he's from South America or the Far East.
Oh, giving me goosebumps.
Yeah. And so it is the man from the dream. And he comes in, and we talk a little bit. I talked to him about the TV and, you know, various features of the TV and whatever. And in the middle of the conversation, related to absolutely nothing, he says to me, "Have you ever been to Mexico?" And of course, nobody knew that I was trying to go to Mexico, only my partner. And so I'm just, you know, kind of fixated now on him. And he starts talking about the fact that there's a small village in Mexico which is his spiritual home. And he tells me that the indigenous people there are being persecuted by the Mexican authorities, military. And again, I don't know really what he's talking about or who these people are. I know now that he was talking about the descendants of the Mayan people, and that the culture I was dreaming into was the Mayan culture. But again, then I knew nothing. And then he told me the exact day, date, and time of day in the future when he was going to die in that village. Just as a matter of normal conversation. And then he went back to talking about the TV.
That is bizarre.
And yeah, and he didn't even buy the TV. Which,
oh, no.
You know, this is, you know, when people say, you know,
what on
God,
earth were you thinking?
The universe, whatever, moves in mysterious ways. It's like the number of these strange, you know, comical vehicles that get used to bring you to, you know, greater understanding or to take you further on the journey has never ceased.
It's like it's like you couldn't write it. It's like when you watch a film and you go, oh no, that's a step too far now. That's
Yeah,
gone beyond, you know.
yeah, it is just like, oh, that's ridiculous. I mean, ridiculous is what it is. And I think I have used the phrase "you couldn't make it up"
Yeah,
more times in my life
you have.
than
I've
any
heard
other
you say that
phrase.
so often.
You couldn't make it up. You literally, yeah.
In fact, you've started conversations with me with those words.
I've started them, filled them in with, and ended them with, "You couldn't make it up." And it's funny because I was talking to somebody about some of this stuff, because I was at a thing, a conference, a Rosicrucian conference at the weekend, and all these synchronicities, so many synchronicities happened at this conference, and I'd been trying to explain, what this is like to somebody who was leading the conference, and then all these synchronicities happened at the conference, and it's like I just find it thrilling. Yeah, I still find it thrilling. And somebody said to me, "Well, surely you should just think it's normal now." And it's like, I don't ever want to find this normal.
No.
I don't ever want to take this sublime intervention, this incredible, mystical, synchronistic magic for granted. I think the fact that I never have done has probably been, instrumental in allowing it to continue.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Okay. So Mr. Interesting Man leaves.
Yeah.
What next?
Well, another thing happened the same week. So, previously to that, a friend of mine, a woman called Drew, who done a very long training shamanically, but she had come to the house to try and help me with the pain. And this was a couple of weeks before the dream. And it was a sunny afternoon. I lived in Bath, where you live, a very quiet area of Bath. And it was a sunny summer afternoon. I can remember it. And I was lying in the bed. And she came in and she said what she was going to do is she was going to go inside me and see what was causing the pain and see if she could give me something to help with the pain, And she started this process, and I didn't really know what she was doing. And I was just lying there. And suddenly all of these noises started to happen outside the window. Now, in Bath, there's not a lot of wildlife. There's a few birds, whatever. I could hear 100 different species of bird, animal, reptile, frogs croaking, whatever. Just like this cacophony of animal sounds, like coming in through the window, filling this room. And again, I was not in an altered state of consciousness at this time. I was just lying there. She was doing the journey. I was just lying there. But as she did it, I mean, it was extraordinary. As she did it, whatever she was doing, the pain got so intense. Eventually, I had to tell her to stop. I just couldn't bear the pain. And but as she was stopping, I just got this really vivid flash of blue, a really beautiful color of blue. And when she stopped, she said that she had given me something to help me. And I said, was it the color blue? And she said, yeah, it was the color blue. So I knew that I saw what she gave me, which was a color. Now, again, we'll kind of gloss over that here, but now 20 odd years later, I've been using color for healing. It was certainly a very ancient methodology of healing, probably one of the original, along with sound frequency, basically.
Yeah.
Frequency can come in audio frequencies or color frequencies, and they both have a profound impact on us. And actually, what I realize now is that what happened in the Brancusi exhibition was that he had managed to physically embody a number of very unique frequencies, which when I went into the room began to have a healing effect on me. Now, it resonated with something in me. And so that's the way I see the Brancusi experience now. And again, there's not a lot of people that even now that are talking about that was one of the original intentions of art. When artists used to understand frequency, proportion, mathematics, ratio, geometry, if you look at someone like Leonardo da Vinci, he wasn't just a painter. He had a depth of understanding of ratio, proportion, that creates frequency that has a profound effect on the human viewer, which artists today really have lost. This is part of the lost knowledge.
A Fibonacci sequence,
exactly. Just one of them. Yeah, it's exactly. So we have this mathematical truth that if we can that creates harmony. And what we've done is move away from that and create an enormous amount of discord, which is why we're in the state that we're in now. Really, it's just a matter of not remembering how to restore and maintain harmony in our every aspect of our lives. And so we get out of harmony, therefore we get sick, we get unwell, we get unhappy, we create toxicity, and that's really the world that we're living in now. It's just part of a natural cycle, but we're coming out of that now. And again, inherent in my journey, inherent in the story, were these clues to the fact that there is, when I experienced the unconditional state of love that went on for so long, I was basically, for some reason, brought into harmony. I was suddenly brought into harmony, and that is
a high frequency.
Yeah, through nothing I did and nothing I intended. Something outside me was assisting that, or another aspect of my own consciousness, whichever way you want to look at it, that I wasn't aware of. But because it didn't fit, because that level of harmony simply didn't fit with the discordant ordinary life that I was living, I fought against it, and I threw myself into discord, because that's, for me, was where normality lied, and for all of us, that's where normality lies, in discord. So I pulled myself out of that state of love and more deeply into discord, which created the depression. So, if anyone doesn't know about that, that's in the last conversation. But this is really what this is all about. This is a journey of the return to harmony for all of us. Yeah. So, so just to summarize that, I did eventually go to Mexico. I did go to Mexico. We actually ended up phoning we had bought tickets to go to Mexico, and a couple of days before we were due to go, we were just phoning everybody we knew, saying, do you want a free holiday in Mexico? Because there's no way I can get on a plane. There's absolutely no way I can get on a plane. And it was just ludicrous to think that I would be able to. And, unless I was fully sedated, there's no way I was going anywhere. And I actually had met this woman who was a psychic. I didn't know her well, but I'd been for a couple of sessions with her. And I thought, I'll just call her and see what she says. And she basically just says, you have to go to Mexico, but you have to go as a warrior. You have to change your perspective. You're seeing yourself as a victim, as somebody that can't, and you have to know that this is everything that's happened, is telling you have to be there. There's only one way out of everything that you're currently suffering, and that is to go to Mexico. And so we went, and the morning that we woke up to go to the airport, I had no pain. For the first time in months, no pain. And the whole time we were in Mexico, 2 weeks, and I had no pain at all. And as soon as we came back to the UK, it all started again. And
so I didn't go and live there.
Yeah. Well, interestingly, after that, I also felt that I had to go to Egypt. And I had not to Egypt specifically, I had to specifically go to the Great Pyramid. And again, exactly the same thing happened. Booked the holiday thinking there's absolutely no way I can go. And this would have been about 6 months later, the same year. And
but just before you get into that story, just what happened in Mexico? You went to Mexico, and what?
I went to Mexico and nothing. Nothing. Well, what happened was very subtle. It was
Right.
nothing earth-shattering. One interesting thing was I was always alone. Everywhere I went, I was alone. I mean, we were told you've got to get up at the crack of dawn and get there before 7 o'clock and whatever else. It would be, completely inundated with, tourists. There was no one there, which was very strange, really. It was very few people there. And wherever I was, where I wanted to be alone, I was completely alone. Like there was no one else there.
When you say there, where do you
Oh,
mean?
we
Like
went to a lot of the
like
Mayan
the Mayan?
pyramid
Yeah.
cities in the Yucatan. Uh,
Right. Yeah.
and then again, at that time, I didn't know really which ones I wanted to go to or why.
Mm.
I was just, going by guidebooks and things. And but one thing that was very interesting is there is a myth or history in the Mayan civilization of a god man called Quetzalcoatl. And Quetzalcoatl was said to have arrived from a sunken land and brought a great shift in consciousness to the people. And he led the Mayan people for a very long time. And Quetzalcoatl is named after the Quetzal bird, which has very long tail feathers, very beautiful long tail feathers, and and Quetzalcoatl wore these in his headdress, and this is his signifier. He was called the feathered serpent. And when we were in Mexico, we went out for a trip to called a cenote, which is a kind of collapsed cave with a lake underneath.
Mm.
And as we were walking out to this thing with the guide, this bird flew right down over our heads like that, and it was the Quetzal bird. And
Wow.
the guide himself was, really, really shocked that
Mm.
that we were so close to this bird. And again, these are details which may seem irrelevant, but actually this is the mythology that is being revealed again, the mythology of these gods, these higher beings returning, whether that's us or whether that's coming from outside of us. I would say it will be both. As we return to our state of harmony, as we restore our godlike essence, we will inevitably alter our external reality, because it's just simply a mirror of our inner state as more of us return to that state. And really it's also, it's also a mythology or a story in consciousness which is revealing a cycle of fall of consciousness and rise of consciousness, the return of Quetzalcoatl and these gods. Is really an analogy for the rise of consciousness, this new cycle of consciousness that we're going through now, this new awakening of consciousness. So yeah,
Okay.
but there's one other thing I had to tell you as well.
Okay. I was just going to ask, is there any
Yeah,
way of summing this
yeah.
up for our
Well, the other
session?
thing that did happen as well is the same week. So I was telling you about Drew because it was an interesting experience. The shaman was an interesting experience in itself.
The
But
person that came and gave you the blue color.
yeah, the day after the man from the dream came to the house, he also, I didn't tell you actually, after he left, he phoned me and he asked me if I would go to Mexico.
Wow.
And make a documentary about the plight of the indigenous people that were being persecuted there. And I said no. I said no. I mean, I said no for so many reasons. I didn't know back then we didn't have mobile phones with cameras on that you could just go and make a film. I wasn't a filmmaker. I didn't have any feeling that I could get to Mexico. And I was completely freaked out, to be honest. I was completely overwhelmed by the whole experience. But the day after he had been to the house, Drew came back to the house and said that she'd had a dream that she was supposed to apprentice me as a shaman, that I was supposed to be learning to be a shaman from her. and I said no to her as well. And
Mm.
I knew that she was right, that I was going on some sort of spiritual journey, but I knew right from the outset that I had to find the language to describe that journey outside of any other culture. You know, I had to have my own culture, my own language, my own
Yeah.
my own way of expressing what was happening to me, and not be tied to any other cultural tradition, spiritual tradition, that might alter that or in any way confine it. And that has been a theme all the way through as well, of me just
Yeah, for sure.
allowing the experience to happen without having any reference that might, be pushing you in one way or another to
Mm.
either have experiences that you then couldn't be sure about, whether you'd created something because you had heard about it or you'd been taught about
Yeah.
it. I've always been very objective. It's like I've tried to allow the journey to reveal itself. And so, yeah, and it has. So yeah,
Okay.
that was it. So there was a connection
Okay.
somewhere between Egypt, going to Egypt and seeing the Great Pyramid, and going to the pyramids in Mexico. Quetzalcoatl was part of it. The Mayan culture was clearly part of it, and something was guiding me. Who was that man? What was going on? Yeah,
We will discover more, I'm sure.
we'll see what happens next.
Freya, thank you. The plot thickens.
Oh, it does, yeah, it really does.
Okay, well, we thank you for spending the time again and getting us further. It's starting to get very, very intriguing, and I don't use that word in a shallow way. I mean, it is quite exceptional, your story, and honestly, we haven't even scratched the surface yet of what's happened.
No,
So brilliant stuff. We will reconvene and continue this journey very soon. Thank you so much, Freya.
lovely. Thanks, Izzy. I'll speak to you again soon.
Bye for now.
Bye.